Afghanistan. He just did a bad job managing both of them. And now here we are finding ourselves facing many of the same problems that were around 8 years ago, except we've had 8 years and taken a lot of casualties, particularly in Afghanistan. All right, team, we've got more coming up. I'll be right back.
This is the Buck Sexton Show.
The Blaze Radio Network.
Now, spreading freedom across the nation. This is
the Buck Sexton Show.
All right, Team Buck, welcome to Hour 3 today in the Freedom Hut. Great to have you with me, as always. Just a reminder that I will be in for Rush tomorrow on the EIB 12 to 3 Coast to Coast. Always a great time. Always such an honor and a privilege. So much fun to do Rush's show and hang out with his team. They're great guys, and I really enjoy being over there. So, of course, if you get a chance, you can tune in. And I feel like the team is with me whenever I'm over there. You know, Team Buck. It's like having a section for family and friends when you're a tennis player, or I guess they have that for football. They probably have that for all professional athletes. I don't know. I didn't go pro, unfortunately. But that will be tomorrow. So there won't be a Freestyle Friday per se this week. We've sort of spread out much of the freestyle segments throughout the week. A sprinkling of freestyle here and there for all of you. I wanted to get back into this one Trump move that is increasingly going to come under a lot of media scrutiny. And I remember during the earlier days of the campaign, right? So back during the primary, you would hear a lot about how Trump's Muslim ban just proved what a fascist he was and what an evil, terrible man he was. And I remember going on TV and saying, over at CNN and saying at the time, this is going to be something that is an evolving. I said something along these lines a long time ago. I don't remember exactly. But I don't think the Muslim ban is good. I think it's counterproductive to ban an entire religion from entry into the country, which was not the way the administration kept the position. They didn't keep it that way for very long. And then they started to focus in a little bit more, and we started to hear about how the administration was going to ban people from certain countries. And then that was said to be also unfair and wrong, and what are we going to do about the poor refugees? There's so many aspects of this discussion, this debate, that I think are misrepresented. One of them is, why is it that the U.S. is the country that, given what we've seen happen in Europe, there's a real argument to be made, and it's one that some folks are still very uncomfortable with, that taking people, even refugees, and there's we should have a tremendous amount of basic human sympathy for anybody who's in a horrific and dangerous and deadly situation like the Syrian refugees and people from other conflict nations are in. I get that. But we also have to look at the way that refugees can integrate into new cultures. And it's tough to see if you're coming from a traditional, you could say, Orthodox Muslim background in Syria, and you've been through a lot of horrific violence and you only speak Arabic, the notion that you're going to thrive in the United States, that might be a bit of a reach. It would seem that there's an argument at least to be made that other Muslim-majority countries, Arabic-speaking countries, would be a much better place for those refugees to go for everyone's sake. And I know that there'll be somebody say, well, Buck, that is happening. Look at Jordan. Well, Jordan's bursting at the seams with refugees already, and they don't make them Jordanians necessarily. This is another very interesting part of this discussion that you don't hear much about. I've been to those refugee camps, as you know, or I've been to the biggest one, Zatari, on the Syria-Jordanian border. I went a couple of years ago for the Blaze. And it's a sobering experience, to be sure. And it's one that if you work in media and you're going to cover wars, I think you should go see what the wages of war, in a sense, are in the consequences that people suffer when they're in these when they're forced in these refugee camps, and the damage that's done to their lives. That's something that people should see. They should be aware of. But when I look at this, I think to myself, well, the Jordanians aren't even processing them to be permanent residents of Jordan. They're just holding them here with the idea they want to go back to Syria. And a lot of them said at the time to me, through a translator, that their goal was not to get to Germany or the UK or the United States. Their goal is to just stay alive and stay safe with their families until they could return to Syria. So the refugee camps in Turkey and in Jordan are really more like holding areas for people, safe zones, and not the safe zones that we were thinking about creating in Turkey or in Syria, rather, along the Turkish border with a no-fly zone. But these are really holding areas. They're not about permanent residency. And the Obama administration, of course, pushed to increase the number of refugees from Syria specifically, but overall the number of refugees in pretty dramatic fashion. And there's no discussion with them about, well, what does this do to assimilation, and what about the security risks? And then you got into the whole, there's no security risk from refugees in these countries. That's just nonsense. That's bigotry. That's hatred. That comes from a dark place that we shouldn't give a public hearing to. Let me just give you this from the Los Angeles Times. Federal agents are reinvestigating Syrian refugees in U.S. who may have slipped through vetting laps. Agents have not concluded that any of the refugees, this is from the Los Angeles Times, that any of the refugees should have been rejected for entry, but the apparent glitch, which was discovered in late 2015 and corrected late last year, prevented U.S. officials who conducted background checks on the refugees from learning about possible derogatory information on them, the two officials said. At a minimum, the intelligence would have triggered further investigation that could have led some asylum applications to be rejected. The refugees whose cases are under review include one who failed a polygraph test when he applied to work at a U.S. military installation overseas, and another one who may have been in communication with an Islamic State leader, according to the officials who spoke on the condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to discuss the matter. This is all from the Washington Times. So this raises questions. The Los Angeles Times. This raises questions. If we're already looking at Syrian refugees that have made their way into the U.S. and saying some may have slipped through the cracks, and when you're talking about maybe being in contact with an Islamic State leader, that's pretty serious derogatory information. This is not something to be taken lightly at all. There do seem to be vetting gaps. The screening process, you could say, is indeed more than just imperfect. It's unacceptable in its current form. Now, I mentioned before the numbers with Obama. LA Times writes here that President Obama ramped up the acceptance of Syrians late last year to address the humanitarian crisis in that country, admitting 15,479 Syrian refugees, which is a 606% increase over the number in 2015. Since the Civil War started, the U.S. has accepted more than 17,000 Syrians seeking asylum. That's according to the State Department. And the vast majority pose no threat, according to officials. Now, I think that that's true. I think we can say the vast majority do pose no threat. But as a country, we are allowed to have a conversation about whether or not we want to put ourselves in a position where even that small threat is something that we have to endure. We have control as a sovereign state over who comes and who goes. And when you're talking about refugees and asylum seekers, this is just the good grace of the American people on offer via the U.S. government. I think one of the parts of Obamaism when it comes to refugees and this particular situation, one of the parts of this that was important to a lot of Trump voters was the sense that the disconnected elites who make the decisions about refugee policy don't have any idea, know nothing about what it's like to, in real life, deal with refugees in your schools, in your neighborhood, and they also have this ideological position that Islamic countries are not more likely to send people into the United States who are a terrorist threat. And you look at the numbers, I think it was just in the last couple of days, it was maybe Jane's Intelligence. I thought it might be the State Department terror report, but I think it was Jane's Intelligence. Did a whole piece on where terrorism is happening most in the world. Terrorism is lethal terrorism, not, oh, someone said something mean to me because I was wearing a Bernie Sanders shirt, not stuff like that, but lethal terrorism, violence, murder done in the name of a political ideology. When you frame it that way, the Islamic world, unfortunately, is the wellspring of far too much of this stuff, and it is disproportionate. These are just facts. Places like Iraq and Syria and Afghanistan are suffering from much more terrorism in their own borders, but also exporting it around the world. And we've seen this now in European capitals. We've seen this in Turkey, these mass casualty attacks. And there's this despicable game the media likes to play of, oh, well, let's not jump to any conclusions. Let's not start to pretend that we can know who might be behind any of this, because that's the real threat. That also adds into people not trusting the administration to handle terrorism as an issue in general. That is a part of this whole discussion. That is an issue that comes up here. And when people don't trust the elites, those who are making policy about immigrants and immigration, to be honest about the threat and to be honest with the American people about what's really going on, then you have a situation where, people are voting for Trump. They don't want to hear it. They don't want the soft peddling. They don't want the nonsense. They just want someone who will give them a straightforward reading, a straightforward approach to dealing with these problems, and who will speak about it openly and honestly. So the Muslim ban has now evolved into a ban on immigrants, a temporary ban on immigrants from 7 countries. And no foreigner has a right to come to the United States. If we improve the vetting procedures and security professionals are allowed to really weigh in on this, and they're not just forced into pretending that this is all going to be okay, well, then it's something that can be reversed. It's a temporary ban. This is not supposed to be a forever thing. This is supposed to just be a let's not allow infiltration of this country by ISIS fighters. They've been doing this in Europe. This isn't some theory that's been concocted. This isn't some fever swamp dream. This isn't some crazy cockamamie novel idea that's now made its way into the discussions about policy. The truth is that in Europe, there have been mass casualty attacks that have occurred because of refugees. And the United States taking in the same kind of refugees is a big problem. And by the way, keep in mind, it's not just the refugees that we take. It's also the U.S. immigration system, which allows those who have family in this country to go to the front of the line for bringing in more people. So if you bring in 15,000 Syrians and then they all want to bring in their uncles, daughters, wives, cousins, whatever it may be, you're going to take in a lot more than that. And it is not incumbent upon the American people to take risks that they don't want to take just because there is this humanitarian impulse. We are a country of very decent and considerate people. And it's not about racism. It's not about xenophobia. And everyone got sick of that. I know I got sick of it. I certainly got sick of the discussion we would constantly hear that the problem with Islamic terrorism is that the countries that are bringing in these refugees aren't nice enough to the refugees. I would think that if a country took you in and saved you from a horrible fate, perhaps the murder of one person and their entire family, there would be a lot of gratitude for that country. But just pick up a paper, and if you can read in some of these European languages, read it in the original, but you can see it in translation, and we pick it up sometimes in our own media, of what the real situation has been with refugees that have been taken in. So Trump's going to try this policy for a while. I mean, Obama took in 15,000 refugees. So you can say that there's a risk inherent in all that, but let's not pretend like this is solving the Syrian conflict or this is saving huge numbers of people, this is all about risk mitigation. And we can have